Hello, everyone. Welcome into a special edition of the College Basketball Bonanza, a sequel of the 2020-21 season amid COVID-19. I'm Nicholas Hodell. Dominic Stern is alongside me via Zoom. Dom, I know we're getting very, very close to the start of the school year at Arizona State. How you feeling about it, man?
I can't wait. I've been trapped in my house for the past 5 months. Only been able to get out for work and maybe golfing a couple of times. I head out on Friday. We're recording this Wednesday night. I'm super stoked to head back to see people like you and other friends that I haven't seen in over 5 months. It's gonna be fun but safe time.
Yes, and having to look through some of the class rosters in the ASU app, I am really excited for some of these classes, and it's going to be a lot of fun, but it's going to be very, very different for the Pac-12. And I know you'll probably recall just over a month ago, the Ivy League became the first conference to cancel sporting activities in the fall, but they did it for the entire semester. And other conferences followed suit for the fall sporting season, but a similar semester-wide decision with effects on the traditional non-conference basketball season has not been made until Tuesday, when the Pac-12 decided that no sporting competition will take place in the 2020 calendar year in a shocking announcement. And I just want to get your initial reactions when you heard the news, Dominic.
Well, I was actually at work, so I heard it about 4 hours after it happened, which was really devastating because as important as player safety is, we enjoy watching these people play and they enjoy playing. And it was just tough news to hear, even though we saw it coming from a mile away. It's always tough, but I think it's probably the right decision. Player safety comes first. If these people are going to be going out and playing for their lives, risking their lives for our entertainment and for their own good, it's not right. We need to be making sure these players are safe, and hopefully they didn't overextend it by making all sports non-playable till the end of 2020, but you'd rather be safe than sorry, and I'm sure that other leagues might follow if things don't continue to get better.
Yeah, and I'll say this, being now in the Midwest for a week, as I'm back in my hometown of Jasper, Indiana, just to kind of visit with some high school friends before going back to Arizona, obviously social distancing and doing all the precautions and whatever. And we're in the middle of Big Ten country. So when the Big Ten news kind of swirled around, you just got the feeling that the Big Ten would do something. And then the news came. And then we got the feeling that perhaps the Pac-12 would do that. About a half hour later, the reports came in. Painful. But then the reports started saying that they'd be canceled for 2020. And that, for me, is when the true shock start to sink in. I had a feeling the fall football season was pretty much done. But with the effects on now in the winter season as well, or at least the first part of it, I did not see that coming. Just the extent that the Pac-12 took. And you can only hope that the Pac-12, when they make that decision, that they're on the right side of history, but not the wrong side, because we could see players, if basketball goes on as normal in other conferences, if the NCAA allows it, you could see some players potentially decide to jump ship. Now, I'm hoping that's not the case, and I'm hoping the NCAA just doesn't allow it either, because we don't want players jumping conferences just because, they're playing right now, so let me go over there and get some playing time. I don't think that would be the best thing to do. It's unfortunate the Pac-12 has chosen to take this decision, a similar one to the Ivy League, but I really think that these players should just stick with their program, stick with their guts. It sucks. It's a really bad decision for the Pac-12, in my opinion, to extend it out this long as of right now. But as we've seen before, this virus, they make the rules. And it's just super unfortunate on that standpoint. And now what we have is another problem in the multi-team events. We talked about this in our last episode where we had a lot of conversation about that. There are now officially 11 events impacted, including the Maui Invitational of Stanford, the NIT tip-off of Arizona, the Diamond Head Classic now officially with ASU and others. Now, reports have been saying that Furman has already been added to the Myrtle Beach Invitational to replace Penn in the Ivy League. So you do have that now starting to shake out. But now that's going to happen more widespread. And Don, we had a lot of conversation about this in our last episode, and I just want to ask you, do you think MTEs in this season are in crisis mode?
Yes, and I said that on the last podcast. I said that it just doesn't make a lot of sense to have these schools coming from different areas of the country in what we normally love to see teams coming from different conferences to represent their conference and play against other teams that they'd only really face in the postseason March Madness. And as awesome as they are, it just doesn't make sense in 2020 because even with the coronavirus possibly being out the window in a couple of months, who knows? We will see. With one conference opting out, it kind of shows that, hey, we care more about conference play because that's where they make a lot of money. They have more games on their networks and stuff like that. And bringing these teams in from different parts of the country where some parts of the country, the coronavirus is really rampant right now, the Midwest and the Southeast. But in other places like the Northeast, the coronavirus isn't as big of a deal there right now. There's not as many cases or deaths. So I think that I still stand strong in my opinion that these MTEs they're in trouble this year, but I don't think it's going to be a bad thing long term if they miss 1 year in the middle of a pandemic when almost everyone else is struggling. The people that rely on those for jobs and such, maybe they'll be hurt, but the tournaments themselves I think will be fine.
Yeah, and you mentioned that the one conference, this is not just one conference. This is a conference where 11 out of 12 members were invited to partake in multi-team events. This is a conference that typically sends nearly all of their members to multi-team events in November and December in the case of Arizona State and the Diamond Tech Classic. And I think now that once we have a power, I mean, obviously for now, it's just one team in 11 different MTEs. But if we are sitting here a month and a half from now in late September, early October, and we find out that, another big conference has taken that step ahead of time, now we got to really start focusing on how these invitations are going to start just replacing teams, because at some point, if this is a widespread decision, you're going to have to be able to replace teams with a very small pool. And we talked about the whole bubble thing in the last program, and Pac-12 Commissioner Larry Scott, I think, said it best. Now, for people that know me personally, know this is a very big rarity that I'm actually saying something positive about Larry Scott, but he said, unlike professional sports, college sports cannot operate in a bubble. And I think that, to me, that shows that Larry Scott gets the model of what collegiate athletics should be. Now, I mean, if we're sitting here come March Madness, NCAA is desperate, trying to get in that bubble, I'll be very interested in seeing how that's going to play out, because not only are you going to have to worry about the proper athletic protocols and stuff like that, you're going to have to make sure that you get enough Wi-Fi, whatever bubble hotel you're using, for these players to attend online classes and get all their online classwork done. Because at that point, that's pretty much taking the athletes out of in-person classes. And I think that is a big hurdle the NCAA will have to take if they do that step. And even the conferences, if they say, well, the college tournaments, we can't pull us off in a neutral site without a bubble, so I guess we're going to have to go that route. And to me, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And that to me is where the NTEs this season, I think, has to draw the line. Because like we said in the last program, what we're going to do if these guys have to quarantine for 2 weeks, like the NIT and tip-off probably will have to do, quarantine for 2 weeks, play your games, go back to your states. Perhaps they may have to quarantine again for their own states. It just gets into this logistical mess. And I know we've touched on that a lot in our last episode, Dom. It's just that logistical mess these MTEs are going to be providing.
Yeah, and you mentioned the whole student-athlete part, mostly emphasizing student. It always sticks out to me how Luke May was in class that Monday after he hit that game winner against Kentucky, and how everyone just applauded him. It just showed that, hey, these guys do have to go to classes. And even though we don't focus on that as the sports fans, it's the truth. These guys have to go to classes. And I think that they could operate in a bubble for March Madness, because that's a 3-week event. They could say, hey, you're going to go to a bubble. Some of you're going to be leaving the bubble after a couple of days. That's just how it happens. And I don't think they'd be hurt that badly if they had to do that. But I think that's too far down the line to be thinking about. They got to really focus on getting the season started under good protocols, especially considering that conferences will likely be joining the Pac-12 and not starting their basketball season on time.
Yeah, and again, the MTEs, as fun as they are, personally, I just don't know if it's feasible. Now, again, we've seen time and time again with this pandemic that states that become hotspots become seemingly not in a matter of a month or so. And we could be talking about these different hotspots. And I think we did mention that also on our last program. Like, this is one of those things to where nationwide travel with 300 some programs going all over the place, to me, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And I know we talked about that a lot in our last program. It doesn't make sense. And now I mentioned the travel. I think this is something that I didn't plan on talking about. But what about these conferences, if we're still talking about this in November, that are in multiple states, like the American Athletic Conference and Conference USA, who as of right now they have not made any sort of announcement on their fall sports in the terms of postponing or canceling. And to me, I mean, not the games those conferences, it just surprised me a little bit because of all the states involved in those bigger conferences like that.
Yeah, and you're just seeing kind of the flaws of college sports and how there's no unity between the conferences, because they're able to do that. It would make this whole situation a lot easier. But the fact that the conferences don't really work together in terms of cooperating and like having similar rules and such, it's showing the effects of that right now. And the conferences that are spread out a lot, kind of like some of the mid-majors, those conferences are in some serious trouble, and including the ACC, where the ACC has two schools in Florida with Florida State, Miami, and you have a team like Boston College in Massachusetts, which has done a good job, and Syracuse in New York. It's just going to be really interesting to see how some of these schools how some of these conferences can find ways to have games and have teams traveling from states that have done well, traveling to states that aren't doing well, and vice versa, with possibilities of teams carrying the virus from state to state when they leave. It could be a mess.
Yeah, and you mentioned that these conferences don't have a lot of unity. One group that seems to have a lot of unity right now are the players in college football, in particular in the Pac-12, with the hashtag We Are United group, with their list of demands for Commissioner Larry Scott, and that has expanded to the Power Five, with Clemson quarterback Trevor Lawrence being a big proponent of the hashtag We Want to Play. Now that's seemingly intermingled, and now when the demand seemingly is now trying to create a players association. Now, if football players are successful in getting these demands, could we see this expand to college basketball?
100%. Even if it's not successful, I still think it will. Players have been used by the schools for a long time. And granted, with college basketball kind of shifting away as it being super necessary, with some players going overseas to go play professionally for a year before entering the draft, and now the G League becoming an option, I think college basketball becomes a little bit less necessary for top of the line players. But for the rest of the people who go to these schools, and the schools generate tons of money based on them not having any pay for the players, I feel like we could be seeing this in players uniting to either get some pay for them. Once again, we're not going to get into that discussion. People talk differently on that, or just getting better rights, better treatment for themselves, and using their power as the players who generate so much money for the school to improve their community, like we've seen with the Pac-12 players wanting more stuff for the Black Lives Matter movement and other stuff in that sort. I would be 0% shocked if this moves towards basketball.
Yeah, and I mean, we know the landscape of the day right now is very volatile in the political landscape, but that's not what we're here to talk about. To me, I think that there are so many routes that college basketball could take right now. We could see a lot of the five stars go into the G League process. We could see overseas become a potential possibility. But if the current way of doing things kind of sticks, I think that the program to be watching out for to at least start this train, Duke, Kansas, Kentucky, Indiana, Gonzaga, wherever these bigger schools are. I don't think it's going to be as widespread necessarily, because I think the pressure to lose a little bit of leverage financially with basketball compared to football, and where a lot of schools make a lot of money on football. basketball seems to be a different story, particularly in those mid-majors. But for the programs that do, like the ones I mentioned, I think you could see a lot of this sort of happening. And, Butler and Gonzaga are two ones that they stick me straight off the bat as basketball schools. And, they join those blue bloods that they have been known for basketball. And I just have this motion that if we're going to see this stuff happening, it's going to be from those schools and those conferences, which those are plenty of conferences to get the conversation going, Dom.
Yeah, definitely. We'll definitely be seeing something of this sort. And I think you're right. It could be starting from those like so-called basketball schools.
Yeah, and obviously like the Pac-12, again, some of the political landscape, that could have seeped in here, but I think the players, this pandemic has taught us a lot about America as a whole. And I think now the players are starting to realize that, hey, we have some power here, and we are going to try and get some leverage out of this, whether you like it or not. And I think that is something that it could change collegiate sports forever. And, if this is successful, to me, the current model of collegiate sports might be dead, Dom.
It could be. We'll see. The NCAA still holds more power over these players until the players go on a strike or some sort, saying, hey, listen, we're done putting up with this. But this pandemic has really changed the whole aspect of a lot of sports. It's been eye-opening in Major League Baseball about how poorly run the sport is. And we're now seeing over in basketball how well run that is. And then now in college sports, we're seeing how the conferences just don't work together at all in unity, and that the players do have more power than we initially thought.
By the way, where's Mark Emmert in all this? I am literally not here to peep from him at all. I'm not sure where he is in all this.
I couldn't tell you, Nick.
Yeah, it's like, the president of the NCAA, it's like, where are you? I just don't understand that motion at all. It's like, why are you hiding from seemingly all of this? I get that you want perhaps the conferences to do things and have them be the ones canceling competitions and all that, but you still have the way to cancel the championships. You still have a lot of this. I don't know where he is. I personally think he should be at least saying something. If it's not, if it's the most vague statement in the world, that's fine. But I think Mark Emmert should not be silent in this. I really don't.
No, he shouldn't. You have the position of power. Utilize it when it's needed. That's what power is for. It's not to be a bully. It's when things go wrong or you're needed, it's for you to use your power to unite everyone. And unfortunately, we see none of that in this country today. That's just the reality.
Unfortunately. Yeah. And finally, so I think perhaps a lot of positive elements surrounding college basketball, and that's been the increasing number of players who've said they're coming back to respective colleges instead of turning pro from the early entry list. Luka Garza, Remy Martin, Alonzo Verge come to mind when you think about that. So my question for you is, do you think there's any one explanation for what I think has been an increase of big-name returnees from this process?
I'm not really sure why they would come back, why there's so many big names coming back. But, if you ever have a doubt in your mind about your current draft stock, you should always come back, because it's very unlikely that if you don't come back and you don't work hard, that you're going to be worse than you were before. That year of experience has shown so many times in college basketball to be super useful, and you oftentimes improve. And for a lot of players, it makes sense to come back. And I for one, am a huge Luka Garza fan, so I'm happy to see him come back. Kofi Coburn, who I love, and Ayu Dosunmu coming back for Illinois. Illinois is going to have another really good year. I'm just super excited because as a huge college basketball fan, I love those experienced teams. I was so appalled by that Duke team in 2018, 2019, knew that they weren't going to do anything. They weren't going to make the Final Four because they were just too young. These experienced teams do well almost every single time. And for those teams to have these guys come back, It's a huge victory, and they got to hope that they get a normal season in, or at least somewhere near a normal season in, because this past year they didn't get March Madness. And I think that's what you're going to say about your main reason. And hopefully they get that experience this year.
Yeah, and I mean, to me, that's kind of like the unfinished business portion of the pandemic. And I think you could say a lot about almost every sport that had their season cut short, whether it is basketball or baseball or even your smaller sports as well. I do think there's an unfinished business. But I don't necessarily think that's the only reason. I kind of group this under this program and this collection of programs because I do think there's a bit of, from some of these players, it's like, what if I don't get drafted and amidst these uncertain times? I mean, that could mean for some of these guys that they got to go back to the drawing board all over again. And, with overseas travel being limited, I mean, I'm sure that the overseas opportunities that you would normally see from some of these guys, they might just go kapoosh and just vanish into thin air during this pandemic. And so I really think that also may be playing a big part of this, Tom.
Oh, it definitely is. Sorry about being on mute there. I was having some water. And the uncertainty around the United States has got to be a huge part of it, because when you can go back to school for free and play the games that you love, and you have some uncertainty going into basketball and going around in the world, if basketball doesn't work out for you, it just makes so much sense to go back, possibly get your degree, or like I said earlier, just work hard and get better and then come back and improve your draft stock as an older player. It just makes so much sense. And in a year like this, even though this isn't a great NBA draft class, it makes perfect sense for anyone who's on the fence to come back.
Yeah, I mean, and it's like, to me, I'm personally not necessarily sure which one is that bigger one. I mean, you got the unfinished business, you got all the uncertainty going on. And I do think the uncertainty and the unfinished business are sort of combining into one here. I don't necessarily think that it is one or the other, but I do think that they're combining. You have a pandemic, it's always going to affect you financially. We've seen the unemployment numbers, and I'm sure those guys don't want to go down into that sort of line there. And I just think that when you have the certainty in an uncertain world, you have to take it. And that's a lot. And that's what a lot of these big name guys have done. And like I've said before in this program, I think the overseas opportunities are just not going to exist for a lot of these guys because the overseas travel being limited. And I just think that this is a good opportunity for these guys to come back. And I'm curious what you think. Is it the unfinished business or the uncertainty that you think is the biggest contributor?
It's a good question. I don't think it really matters because everyone's situation is different. And I mean, this is just like a fun conversation to have, like just talking about sports. But I mean, that's a good question. I would say it's probably more of the unfinished business because these guys are such competitors and they play to play in front of March. And I heard this is going out of college basketball for a minute, but Walker Buehler, when he was on a mid-game interview on Sunday Night Baseball on the opening weekend, they're asking him what it's like to play in front of an empty stadium. And he straight up said, "It sucks. I worked my entire life so that I could play in front of thousands of screaming fans. And now I don't get to do that." And I think for those guys to get the opportunity taken away from them to play in front of those millions and millions of fans watching them play in March Madness, they want that. That's what they want. That's what they play for. That's what they work for in the gym. They work to get that opportunity to play in that huge football stadium in front of thousands of fans in person and in front of millions of fans watching TV. So I think them coming back from that, or coming back to possibly do that, is a main force.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I'm only saying that because of the sheer volume of big names that are coming back. I think that if this is a big volume of some of like the smaller but major guys that may have declared to get some look, to get some advice, I think this would be a whole nother conversation. But the sheer number of these big names that are coming back, I think it is the unfinished business that is very much contributing to all of this. And as we close, I certainly hope that next 2 weeks we can have a normal conversation about what do we go from here. But just a quick thought on what do you think may happen in the next few months should this pandemic continue to rear its ugly head for college basketball purposes?
Well, if it continues to get ugly, I think every conference is going to move along with the Pac-12 and have no sports for 2020, which is obviously the opposite of ideal. But I have faith that the more we learn about this virus, the more people will realize what's good, what's wrong, what's right, and we'll continue to do more of those things. And cases, deaths, and hospitalizations can all continue to go down, and we can get more towards a normal life.
Yeah, we can only hope that even though some of our fall sporting athletes may not have a fall season, we can only hope that some of these winter sports have that opportunity to just play the sport they love and continue doing what they love to do and what they've trained for long, long hours during the off season. Appreciate having you on, Dom. This has been a special edition of the College Basketball Bonanza, or sequel of the 2020-21 season amid COVID-19. For Dominic Stern, I'm Nicholas Hodell, signing off.